Last guest here today. Super excited for this conversation, and I am going to stay live, Tyler. I know you so well. I do know your company. Super excited to talk about the space. Still a private company, going through the go public process. So a little bit different here. Still got a ton of people on the call. And so we'll talk about your financing opportunity, I'm sure, through this. But Apex Labs is developing a psilocybin-derived treatment to address the critical needs of veterans suffering from PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Company has received Health Canada approval to conduct North America's first take-home multi-dose psilocybin clinical trial. Apex is currently private, plans to list in the near future. Tyler, I've been watching you grow for the last year, and the amount of media attention you've received has been remarkable. Based on your milestones. And I think it's a super exciting space to talk about. Let's pull up your deck. Let's run through it. And if you don't mind, I'll jump in with questions here and there just for a little bit of dialogue.
Of course, Arlen, appreciate it. Bear with me 1 second while we cue this up. All right, Arlen, listen, thank you so much for the introduction. Tyler Powell, co-founder, CEO of Apex Labs. And as Arlen mentioned, we're addressing a severe unmet need with psilocybin treatments with a focus on veteran patients. And also, as you mentioned, we are a proudly private company, but we are in the path of a go public strategy aiming for a Q1 listing in the US. So let me get into this here. So why Apex? I mean, I'm confident that the majority of the people on this call that are listening in or will watch this and have a family member, whether it's a friend or an associate or somebody in their lives that currently is suffering from PTSD, anxiety, or depression. And, some of the numbers around, depression and suicide are just absolutely alarming. So, we'll go into some of the numbers later, but it's a clear-cut problem. And we created this company with two pillars to address those problems. And one being the early access program, which will create pre-drug identification revenue, and the clinical pipeline, which is more traditional. And what we have is two drug assets that are eligible for both of these pillars, one being the world's first take-home microdose, and the second being a macrodose, which taken in clinic for the assisted psychotherapy. Now, these two drug assets cover the full spectrum of either mild, moderate, and severe disease states. And once the first drug is approved, it comes with 8 years of data exclusivity in Canada. You'll see, here we go. So why now? Again, if anyone on this line has access to a phone or news, psychedelic news in your face every day, it's growing louder, and it's time for a change, right? People are looking for a new avenue, and it's very apparent. So our strategy. Here, I'll focus here on the commercialization because that's really what sets us apart. We have two statistically powered phase 2B trials approved by Health Canada for both of our drug assets. The critical part with that is upon completion of those trials, Canada has a very unique opportunity called the NOC-C. It's a conditional approval process where over 160 drugs have already attained this. We will be challenging Health Canada, like we have for years, to have that drug approval through this channel. What that allows us to do is it gives us access at a baseline, like our foot in the door, to 3.1 million Canadians on the PTSD and 8.6 on depression. Now, that's physicians nationwide that have access to our drugs to prescribe to their patients. So as you can imagine, from a revenue bucket, that is obviously incredibly appealing, but also for the fact of just getting care to Canadians nationwide, having to run a pre-phase 3 trial. Now, that conditional approval you still have to run the phase 3, but it allows physicians nationwide to prescribe our drug. Obviously, from there, we have a path to the US markets through an Ivy League school that we should be announcing soon. And we'll be filing with the FDA, hopefully here in the next 30 to 60 days. So, we're obviously the US market being, I think 54% of the pharmaceutical market is the obvious next step. And then Europe and Australia, which have been little more liberal with the approval systems for psychedelics. So, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. The market's obviously enormous. So the first column that we mentioned was the early access program. again, really what separates us outside of our commercial plan is the opportunity to get access to pre-DIN revenue. And Q1 2022, the Food and Drug Regulations Division of Health Canada amended what you'll hear me say the SAP. It's a special access program. They amended it to include psilocybin and MDMA. The SAP in a nutshell is for emergency cases that are for access to drugs that are not approved yet. And a patient's physician would file an SAP on their behalf to gain access. And we're very—
Is that reserved for veterans in Canada right now?
Anybody that meets a severe disease state. So somebody with a wildly treatment-resistant depression, for instance, where they've tried 10 different therapies without luck, if they saw a phase 2 trial going on in Switzerland and their physician mentioned it to them and said, oh, we'll go through the SAP program to try to get access to that drug. It's open for anybody in Canada. Right now, the only way you're going to get access to that for psilocybin is if you have treatment-resistant depression or major depressive disorder. And for the MDMA, is more designed toward PTSD. But you're right. We have a veteran patient going through the process right now. I was hoping the SAP would be approved prior to this call so we could celebrate it, but it should be coming through imminently. But what we did do is support Canada's first SAP approval. It was 6 palliative patients in Masuda, Dr. Masuda, sorry. And that was, early last year, where they showed not only did they approval, but they actually passed this through. And I want to be clear, this was not just approved, but these patients were actually dosed and given pre and post integration therapy work. So it showed that the machine was slowly moving in the right direction. And
sorry, just a question on the slide here. I cut you off. The generation of pre-DIN revenue. Describe what pre-DIN revenue is to people on this call.
You got me. I was right where I was going, Arlen.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So why this whole, this is so significant is it mirrors what happened with medical cannabis. And why that's significant is veterans in Canada have a reimbursement program where they have full blanket insurer coverage for medical cannabis and as well as ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. The cannabis market this year is expected to be $330 million in reimbursements for roughly 22,000 veteran patients.
Wow.
So that, and just to be clear, the veteran patients are considered our retired RCMP officers and veteran, military veterans, sorry. So it's a lot of Canadians, and they got the medical reimbursement for medical cannabis before it got a DIN. And you keep saying DIN, it's a drug identification number, which means your drug was approved. Like cannabis still medically does not have a DIN, yet they've got $330 million of reimbursements.
Wow.
So we are looking to replicate that exact model using psilocybin through the SAP program until a medical access program comes about or a drug approval happens. So this is a very crystal clear path to revenue as early 2024. I'll get to that in a further slide, but this pillar we get really excited about because it's happening now, right? We're not talking about a phase 3 study that's 2 years out. This is something that people can request tomorrow, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The process is significant, but we can, we've been able to navigate it very well. So hopefully that answered your question, Arlen.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So our second pillar is a traditional drug development through clinical trials. So our path to prescription, what is exciting in this is not only do we have that world's first take-home trial approved, we executed a proof of concept. So we had people taking, and there's nothing in this, there's just a label, but it's as simple as, people were taking this in the comfort of their own home where they would reconstitute our drug with water, take it like a shot on an empty stomach before breakfast, and met endpoints with no adverse events. And it informed us to file a much larger 294 patient statistically powered phase 2b trial, which is ready to launch in Q4. Obviously, that powder in the bottle, as I mentioned, was just to get our foot in the door. It was the fastest path for approval for Health Canada. But since then, in the last 12 months, we've been developing a capsule that will have all of its stability data and first week of December. So for next year, we're going to have both a microdose and a macrodose capsule, which is obviously a lot easier to take orally than having to take powder in a bottle. So the microdose, there's a proof of concept trial done. the large phase 2b trials ready to roll, as well with the capsules to go along with it. On the macrodose side of things, we have just completed our patient pre-screening, and we were incredibly thrilled with how fast we got it done. So it was just shy of 100 patients in, I believe, 45 days. And the macrodose is a much more severe disease state. Like for the depression scales, it's a very high rating, and all the patients, I mean, it's not good news for the patients that they meet the requirement, but it was great news for our trial that we were able to get the pre-screening done so quickly. So our patient recruitment will be very quick on the macrodose trial, which is ready to go in roughly about 45 days. Oh, and I forgot to mention on the path to prescription, what Canada does to protect new drug assets from competition is the very first drug approval for a new drug asset in Health Canada comes with 8 years of data protection. We believe we're on path. There's one or two other competitors that are relatively close, but it's who's going to be able to make the most robust argument for the conditional approval that gets it, that will get the 8 years data exclusivity. So our path to commercial revenue. What gets me excited is we're hedged. A traditional drug development company has a clinical pipeline. They have all their eggs in a basket. And if that clinical trial, for instance, had some sort of adverse event, then that's it, right? They're on to the next drug, or they tweak it and they retry. Through our early access program and the conditional approval, we're hedged throughout this process. So regardless if Health Canada approves our conditional approval or not, if it doesn't, we then created enough data to be SAP eligible for our take-home microdose. So we already have our macrodose SAP approval. Now we'll have a microdose, and now our path to revenue. Like, we don't need a drug approval to create revenue and keep this company and significant capital, which you'll see another slide. And then obviously having to go to pivotal phase 3 trial broadens the access globally. And you'll see we have a few global commercialization experts on our team that have done this. They're doing this their whole career. So I'm really, we're really excited that we've formatted this, that we're hedged throughout the approval process. And here's the projected revenue. So these are very conservative numbers. And the crystal clear point I want to make on the early access program left chart is these numbers are from handfuls of patients, like veteran patients. To get to $100 million in revenue, I believe it's 8,600 veteran patients at our current strategy. So we don't need millions or hundreds of thousands of patients to make this a wildly successful revenue model. These revenue projections are at about 80% margins, and that's going to go considerably higher when as the price of the drug comes down.
Is there a marketing strategy to access those types of patients? Like, I'm sure you're hindered. You can't go out there and say, hey, everyone, like, there's obviously a lot of regulations in regards to that. So how do you access those patients?
Well, for instance, we have between our chief medical officer and 2 of our key opinion leaders, we have access to 10,000 veteran patients that are diagnosed with PTSD in Eastern Canada. Just those 3 practitioners alone,
And so they would have that many patients that
it would just be a referral system. It's just a traditional medicine. So they would refer to the clinic that's hosting the SAPs, and it's actually quite streamlined. It took us years to funnel this out with Health Canada, but now it'd be a very streamlined process where a registered nurse would handle the referral system. And like I said, once the referral or the reimbursement program's in place, when we say reimbursement, the patient doesn't pay and get reimbursed. The bill just goes directly to Veteran Affairs Canada. So on the 1st or the 30th that you got paid, you ran 243 patients through, well, then you get the reimbursement for those 243 patients.
Okay, cool.
So it's a very, very streamlined process. But again, the nice part, we're not reinventing the wheel. This wheel was already created with medical cannabis.
Yes.
Process with ketamine as well. It's a little different with ketamine, but we're not breaking the ice here. It's already been done.
Yes. Thank you, cannabis.
Yes. Yeah. Medical cannabis. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, medical cannabis.
Right. And so guys, here's a screenshot of the team. And this is directors and officers only. This does not include our advisors. 190 clinical trials executed, 20 drugs taken to market over 70 countries. And as you see in the bottom, some of our team members have worked for the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world and have excelled taking drugs to market. So we have an incredibly seasoned team, which I'll give you a quick introduction to here. I noticed a typo probably 2 seconds before this started. We don't have 2 chief medical officers. Dr. Peter Tomlinson in the top right as our technical officer. My apologies for the typo.
Unforgiven.
You'll see Dr. Mark Johnston and Greg Rutherford are our newest additions. Mark is a psychiatrist. He owns and operates, I think it's just shy of 15 veteran-focused clinics. He was assigned an authority on the SAP for our patients. And Greg is just an absolute genius. He's become a good friend and has now, he's taken multiple drugs globally on global commercialization scales. And so, the back end and everything you're seeing regarding quotes is from his eyes. So as you can see, the team's got enough qualifications to do 15 of these trials, let alone 2. We have a very active advisor team. We have a much larger team than this, but this is the active group. And you'll see, we have 2 Harvard-trained, we have a Harvard-trained neurologist on our team, as well as another psychiatrist from Harvard, a synthetic chemist that handles all of our GMP and drug design. So, again, some people have advisors that are, take a call every quarter. We speak to this group every week. This is the optimizing our clinical trial enrollment. And for those that don't understand how complex patient recruitment is, this is absolutely an incredible path because it's an always-on recruitment strategy. There's 3 different buckets where a patient would fall in. They'll show some interest. They'll say, listen, I want to get access to psilocybin therapy, but I don't necessarily know where I fall or which one I'd be eligible for or which I'd prefer. And the nice part with us having the 2 different drug assets is they could fall, like mild and moderate is for the microdose. So that's great. You can be a patient that gets access to the microdose. Now, if you're more on the severe side, you have both access to the Summit 90 clinical trial and our early access program. So if you didn't happen to live in the 5 cities that we're launching our research centers for that clinical trial, if you happen to be in, some of the smaller town in Northern Alberta, we can still refer you to a physician to do the SAP program if you're not, you're not going to travel for the trial. And the goal for us is to make sure that microdose is eligible for the early access program. So every patient that puts in an application, shows interest, shows, any aptitude of being a part of this program, we know that they'll fall in one of our buckets. And it's going to save us an absolutely astounding amount of capital and time being able to recruit for all 3 at the same time. So this is a very critical point of our strategy for capital savings and time savings. And this is our critical path. This is our from inception. We've from the day that we decided to start putting together a protocol to having Health Canada's first approval, to being part of the first Canada's first SAP, to then being the world's first take-home approval, which we lobbied for the better part of a year and a half with Health Canada, and actually they gave us a guidance throughout that process, right away to our pre-screening and what it looks like for timeline. We're roughly we're aiming to have both trials started by the end of this year, and it's roughly a 12-month runway till we have our full data readouts, at which point it's eligible for the conditional approval filing and SAP. So this is we've ran this company like a lean tech startup. We've done this with a very small amount of capital, and I'm very proud of this chart because in my opinion we're the leader in Canadian drug development for psilocybin. So that's the kind of the wrap of where we are. This is some of the guys. We've been Eater Investments is a psychedelic fund that's been supporting us out of Florida. PI, Canaccord, Haywood have all been involved. Same with Lead and Infor out of Toronto, family office. Featured on a lot of media especially about the last 12 to 16 months. And as Arlen mentioned, we are a private company. Where PCAOB audits will be ready, I was promised early next week. And our goal is to raise $5 million in our bridge or pre-public round and a $10 million go public round. And on the go public side of things, we've been approached everything from, CPCs to SPACs, everything on the shell side of things or RTO side of things. But we also have 3 engagements in our inbox for traditional IPO, big board US markets, which would be the preferred way to market. So that's Apex in a nutshell. So happy to jump into the Q&A.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I just want to have a discussion about like psychedelics and mental health, and we'll get into we'll dive a bit more into your company here. So who are the comps on the big board? So I know there was a lot of struggles with listing cannabis companies in the United States. Do we see those kind of hurdles on the psychedelic side to get listed? Because obviously you're going to get a much bigger valuation listing down there if you can.
Yes, no, absolutely. So there is several, everything from Compass Pathways to Lucy Scientific, that are, there's several listings on the big boards in the US. And actually the nice thing for us is, from a regulatory standpoint, is we don't physically touch the drug. We communicate between different licensed vendors. So similar to cannabis, remember they would shut down everyone's bank accounts if you touched cannabis, and they're actually doing that with psilocybin. Like, I know RBC won't allow a licensed lab to have an RBC bank account. We are moving forward.
You're saying you don't touch the drug?
Yeah, we don't touch the drug. So that, like a group like Lucy Scientific, who's from Vancouver Island in Victoria, they have a licensed drug where they're making, producing, manufacturing, selling drug product. I mean, obviously the SEC and FINRA would be all over that, as opposed to us being at arm's length.
Now, I think the mental health aspect here is really interesting. You talk like 15 years ago, you talk about using MDMA or ketamine or any kind of psilocybin to treat PTSD, mental health, depression, addictions. Like, you would be laughed off the planet. Yeah. And, the stigma around psychedelics is certainly lifting. And, I read that book by Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind, and learned about the history of psychedelics and their role in medical and how they built the stigma around it. But it just seems like there's this feeling that I don't trust big pharma anymore. So I'm more open to these alternative therapies, right? And I just see this just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. How quickly can this move forward? Like, at what point does Canada say, all right, like, we're good, let's go, this works?
I think, the key role in that is how poisonous and addictive the current SSRIs and antidepressant, antipsychotic market is, right? It's to have a level in between where somebody could be mildly blue or mildly depressed, or they could have a severe depression and not want to jump on highly addictive SSRI package. And the goal is, we also work in tandem, but it should be the first option. Try this, right? Try this before going on something that's a much more toxic drug. And people could argue till they're blue in the face on this, whether they believe that there'll be a medical access program prior to drug approvals. My bet would be that they will not allow like a blanketed medical access program like they did with cannabis before some companies get DINs and complete their clinical trials. Because I know, looking back at it, like some of the big companies like Tilray, they were having amazing success. They were running CBD trials for, sick kids with epilepsy and getting great success. Well, as soon as that was lifted and it wasn't necessary, all that research stopped. And I believe that they made them. They might, it depends who you talk to. So they might say that was a mistake by creating that access point. I don't think they'll make that same mistake with psilocybin, and I'm for it. I mean, obviously, it's a drug development company that's like leading the country. I'm all for it, but we want to see the real research and not hokey pokey, 10 patient trials, real statistically powered trials that shows that these drugs work. And I think that's really what's going to set everything apart regarding this compared to cannabis.
So the cannabis market just went crazy, but a big part of that was like the recreational side. right? Do you ever see the governments ever approving these types of drugs for recreational use?
I don't know. I was wrong with cannabis. I was wrong.
Mm.
But at the same time, for anybody that's on this call that's from Vancouver, I mean, if you live and work downtown Vancouver, I could walk out our door here and go to 5 different mushroom dispensaries.
Yeah.
And they're not getting their doors. I mean, a few have been closed, but the reason they weren't able to get closed is because there was a Section 56 exemption that Health Canada allowed pedestrians, civilians, to sign up for. So now if you just sign in to say this is for medical use, they're not going to verify you have that exemption or not, but technically they're not breaking a law. Now we know that's not the case because they didn't hand out many of these exemptions. It's not like 100 people going through each door, but I lost the bet with cannabis, and I would definitely say that it wouldn't be recreational approval in Canada for this.
Okay, so you're looking for $5 million. What's your pre-money valuation here?
Pre-money, we're sitting at roughly 20 million Canadian. We closed, our largest round was closed 2 years ago. We went to market for 1.5. We closed 3.4 non-brokered privately. We've been waiting on our audit. I noticed a comment there. The SRCO was our PCOB audits. We had Manning Elliott did 3 IFRS audits previously, and we were starting to get approached by some SPACs, so we pivoted to a PCOB audit. If anyone's looking for one, I'd highly recommend SRCO. They've been incredible. They've hit all the timelines at a very reasonable price. So we're expecting that audit to be done early next week, at which point we can properly be engaged on our go public strategy.
Where do you think the biggest misconception about the psilocybin market is, like, for investors?
Well, there were so many bad actors out there that just buried shareholders, and
100%.
And you can see, like, even some of the big ones, like a company like Field Trip, right? I think, don't quote me on these numbers, but I believe they raised 102 million US to create 4 million in revenue.
Wow.
Right? And they just yard sold all their clinics. In fact, one of the gentlemen we work with took over their one in Atlantic, Canada. But that's like, I don't know how many thousands of shareholders just got completely buried. And if you look at it, there's only a few that are still surviving, that are executing. And I think people got into it. That's why they called it Cannabis 2.0, because I think people said, listen, I financed an LP. I was able to make cannabis and sell it.
I can do it again.
Yeah. And it's a pharmaceutical play. And that is, and I thought when we first started looking at this under a really tight lens and looking at how Health Canada was approving licenses and how they were moving in the background, you have to get a pharmaceutical drug approval, or you're a drug manufacturer. And the drug manufacturers are even a tougher spot, because unless you, like, how are you going to compete with a 400,000 square foot pharmaceutical lab in Texas that can just open 2 rooms, change their license, and turn the taps on? Like, if you create a manufacturer that's solely on psychedelics, it's very tough to create revenue. Like, how much research is actually, being done to sell a gram here or 2 there? And same with the psychedelic clinics, or look at the ketamine clinics, right? The majority of those failed because they weren't medical clinics that happen to have the ability to administer ketamine, which would work, right? We all know medical clinics work. It's like, having a chain of dentists. We know those models work, but if you just are hyper focused on just strictly being a psychedelic outfit, obviously it's a very tough business to be in.
Yeah, entirely. If you can learn from the mistakes of the cannabis sector and even some of these early entrants into this space, and just capitalize on their mistakes, I think you got a great opportunity. So go get 'em.
I appreciate that, and I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So you're raising dough. If people want to find out more, how do they get a hold of you? And if they want to participate in the financing, how do they get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So we'll be announcing the financing in the next week or 2. But Tyler at apexlabs.com.
Okay.
Easy person to get a hold of, guys. Shoot me an email. Happy to run through any questions or comments and get a little more details going out.
Awesome. Tyler, really appreciate your time.
All right, Arlen.
Thanks.
Great. We put this together. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Yeah.
Take care.